Meeting called to order, May 3rd, 2023. Planning Commission meeting any written communication?
Commissioner, Chairman Gonzalez, first we call to order the next pledge of allegiance. And then we'll do roll call after that.
I'm reading off the agenda here.
Okay.
Call to order, pledge allegiance.
Sure, let's all stand. Let's leave this, ready to begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Commissioner Arvizo,
Present.
Commissioner Murillo,
Present.
Commissioner Ramirez,
Present.
alternate Commissioner Fonseca, Vice Chair Hernandez,
Present.
and Chair Gonzalez.
Yeah, present. Approval of the agenda.
Need a motion?
A motion.
Oh, all motion to approve the agenda?
I'll second the motion.
Second.
Okay, roll call, Commissioner Arvizo,
Present.
Commissioner Murillo,
Present.
Commissioner Ramirez.
Gabriel, I think we're asking for
Approving,
approval.
yeah.
Okay, okay.
I'm taking this as approval, right?
Okay, yes,
Okay,
thank you. Yeah.
yes. Alternate Commissioner Fonseca.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hernandez
Yes.
and Chair Gonzalez.
Okay, any written communication?
None from staff.
Public comment, non-agenda items. The public may address the commission on any item of interest to the public that is not on the agenda, but is within subject matter jurisdiction within thereof. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes.
There are none online.
Reports and requests.
No reports from staff.
Okay, go down to non-hearing items. We have a public vehicle downtown parking survey update.
Thank you, Chair, members of the Planning Commission. Eva Lara, Planning Technician, will be giving this presentation tonight.
Hello, good evening, Chair, members of the Planning Commission. I'm Eva Lara, and I'm the planning technician for the city. Okay. So this is the Pueblo Viejo downtown parking study update. This is for future management of existing parking supply. So the background is that our intent is to update the Planning Commission regarding parking occupancy as the Pueblo Viejo downtown district continues to grow. So we plan to give you an update every 6 months. So the next one will be fall 2023. So in October of 2019, the city of Coachella conducted a parking analysis for monitoring of parking occupancy here at the city. In this study, we actually learned that parking occupancy if it exceeds 80%, that the parking occupancy is considered full. The study intended to provide findings and recommend to understand potential parking supply and demand, determine right-size parking standards, and manage future parking supply and demand. So this study provided various options for better parking management, and these include cooperative parking management, which means both city and property owners cooperate to utilize off-street parking. bicycle parking, which means provide a safe and convenient biking and walking experience for a viable choice. It also included time restricted parking to increase turnover rate for the prime on-street and off-street parking supply. It also included parking, paid parking, temporary and overflow parking, which means for the city to make arrangements with private parking owners and schools to utilize their parking in case of overflow, for example, like city events. And this would require a leasing agreement. It also had an option signage and user information. It means utilize signage for directing visitors to available parking spaces as a usable tool to avoid congestion. So it continues. It also gave us an option for effective use of leftover space in downtown vacant lots, converting parallel parking and to angled parking. It also included employee parking, which encourages employees to park on their designated parking areas. And the last one was shared centralized parking structure, which that would be our last alternative since it's costly. So we would try to avoid that and first go from 1 to 9, if possible. Okay, so in September 5th, 2022, we conducted our first study in the downtown, specifically 4th Street and 7th Street. We paid special attention on 6th Street between Orchard and Vine Street, which is between the library and the City Hall segment. The parking survey demonstrated that parking is abundant throughout the downtown district. The parking occupancy was observed highest on the 6th Street section at 77%. So this is right in front of City Hall. So the outcome of the study was 2 parking spaces with a 15 minimum time restriction. According to our observations, the 15-minute restricted parking has been successful in ensuring faster parking turnover. And as you can observe, when I went this day, everything else was full except for those 2 parking spots. So it has been working. Okay, so this year, 6 months later, we conducted another study. The first one was made on Tuesday, which is March 28th. So we call that observation day 1. And the second study was conducted on Friday, which is April 21st, and we call it observation day 2. The second was chosen specifically to evaluate any impact from the Coachella Festival. So both were conducted between the hours of 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. And we expanded the area of study to include the entirety of the downtown from 1st Street to 9th Street. And the plan was organized in number of blocks, which you can see on this slide. On this other on this slide, you can actually see the exhibits, on-street parking occupancy exhibits, and the off-street parking occupancy that we have in the downtown. So on 6th Street between Orchard and Vine Street, on observation day 1, we observed that the parking occupancy occurred the peak at 3 p.m. at 89%, which exceeds that 80% threshold. And the lowest was at 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. at 33%. On observation day 2 during the festival, the peak parking occupancy occurred at 9 a.m. at 84%, and the lowest at 5 p.m. at 16%. This is observing the 6th Street, but between Cesar Chavez and Grapefruit, so the entire segment of 6th Street. So in observation day 1, the peak parking occupancy occurred at 11 a.m. at 48%, and the lowest parking occupancy occurred at 7 a.m. at 27%. On observation day 2, the peak parking occupancy occurred at 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. at 46%, and the lowest parking occupancy occurred at 5 p.m. at 21%. So the library block, which is the one that you see on the screen, this is 6th Street, 7th Street, Orchard, and Vine. So this also tends to be a little more congestion than the rest of the blocks. This one, the peak parking occupancy occurred at 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. at 66%, and the lowest at 7 a.m. at 20%. On observation day 2, the peak parking occupancy occurred at 9 AM at 82%, and the lowest occurred at 5 PM at 8%. So this is a Veterans Park, Block 5. For observation day 1, the peak parking occupancy occurred at 1 PM at 56, and the lowest occurred at 7 AM at 14%. On observation day 2, it was a little lower than that. So it was peak parking occupancy occurred at 1 PM at 42%. And the lowest was at 7 AM at 19%. I also wanted to include the Palmview Elementary School block, which is block 11. This block tends to be a little congested during school hours. So it usually ranges from like 9 AM to 3 PM, and it's usually 61%. So that was observed on both days. So the conclusion, peak occupancy in the downtown district occurs around 11 AM at 42%. And this is like the total data of the total supply. So the March survey showed that an average of 34% parking spaces were occupied during the day, while the April survey showed only 33%. Neither the Mexican Consulate nor the Coachella Festival Weekend 2 made an impact on the total parking occupancy. The parking occupancy is observed highest on 6th Street, on the 6th Street segment between Orchard and Vine Streets at 89%. So usually 1st, 2nd, 3rd Street, 8th Street, 9th Street, we don't see a lot of traffic or high parking occupancy. It's usually 6th Street and 7th Street because of the school. So considering that, the Planning Commission might consider recommending options to manage parking on the 6th Street segment from 8 AM to 5 PM, Monday through Friday. It has demonstrated the highest occupancy rate throughout the observation, exceeding the 80% occupancy threshold at a few hours. So for a few hours, it exceeds that 80%. Since the study has determined that we do not have any parking issues, we can utilize option 6 from the options that we were giving out on the study in 2019 to better manage our parking occupancy on the 6th Street segment. And that was the signage and user information, which utilizes signage for directing visitors to available parking spaces as a useful tool to avoid congestion. So it's kind of redirecting, visitors to the Veterans parking spaces, Veterans Park, Vine Street, Orchard Street, and kind of avoiding them to just utilize that segment in front of City Hall and the library. Okay, so that is the end of my presentation. If anyone has any questions, I'll welcome your questions. Thank you.
What's the total amount of parking on the downtown area?
The total amount is total supply. 1,537 parking spaces.
1,537.
Mhm. Mhm.
In
all
chair-
of downtown, right?
Yeah,
Not,
all-
not
all-
just, not just 6th
downtown
Street.
with that map that shows.
Yeah.
Yes, so
Yeah.
I'll go back to the map.
Obviously, the study did not reflect, special events that are held downtown, right? And that's probably where we're missing the link here.
Mhm.
But one thing that I would probably like to see as far as, yes, like during normal operating hours, we don't have a parking problem. But perhaps we can just look at revising parking as far as how instead of parallel parking to the curb, maybe perpendicular along 6, right? Would best suit the area, or maybe gain a space or two, right? That we can probably show we're trying to provide some mitigation for when we do have, special events in the downtown, right? We've added, or we're taking that into account and moving forward, right? Because right now it just kind of feels like, okay, we're gonna add a sign or two, right? That's, to direct drivers to areas of parking, but people really want to park downtown, right? alongside, I know I do, right? So that's cool, you know, I don't mind walking at all. But I think if we can somehow gain a space or two, or perhaps, you know, figure out a way to change the flow of downtown, we can help relieve some of the congestion or traffic issues that we face during special events.
Eva, thank you for your presentation, by the way. And I love that you parsed out all the documents and the agenda as well.
Thank you.
So my question to you for the survey, were they observations based on how many cars parked during that time frame? Was someone
Yes.
given a tally?
Yes.
Okay, understood. So it's more of an observation versus a survey of like how many?
Exactly.
Understood.
So every hour, actually every 2 hours, our planning team went out and they started observing and counting every
Mhm.
single car that was parked in that designated area.
Understood.
Mhm.
And this was right here for this corridor? for the-
Yes.
okay,
Mhm.
just
So
wanted to-
it was all this that you see on the screen.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
on the special events, are we, did the school district open the doors at all? Do we utilize that space at all? Do we,
For parking,
yeah, for parking?
I'm not sure. But that's something that, you know, our option or this study was letting us know that we could do is to actually utilize that parking space because it's pretty big for events or when we have events at the city
Yes.
or anything else.
It's probably an additional 500 at least. Or
That's block 11, so that would be, I'll let you know. We have 203.
200
Mhm.
or half the.
Yes.
It's quite a bit. Is that really the only open space? I know the county, is that on the new facility for the county? Right on 16?
So for that one, part of that parking space,
Was that the 1,000? Is that also added to the number you gave us?
oh, yes,
Okay,
the 1537?
Yeah.
Yes,
okay, perfect.
So of those 1,500 spaces, how many of those are actually available for not overflow, like so obviously those 1,500 spaces, some are identified in residential communities that probably occupied spaces already, right?
Mhm.
So what I'm trying to get is how many actually are available for parking for the non-homeowner in those areas, right?
Mm.
So what do we have a percentage of those? We can do the math. So it'll probably be.
We actually do not.
No?
Mhm.
So,
1,500
so
divided by,
so it includes on-street, right? It
Yeah.
also includes off-street. Now, it doesn't include, my understanding, it doesn't include the Pueblo Viejo villas, right? And this one. But I don't think it does, at least on this map, it doesn't. And so there's never gonna be someone in the public that's gonna park in their parking lot, right? It just doesn't happen.
right?
So it's gonna be the other ones that are accessible, and there is a lot of accessible parking that isn't gated off. Maybe the one that is gated off is the one behind the county building,
Mhm.
right? And those are opportunities to potentially use, right? Or some of the examples that was brought up at the school. But all the offsite and on-street is counted as part of this, except for maybe the Pueblo Viejo villas, because that's more of a newer project.
Mhm. How the thing becomes like, how do we enter into these agreements with, you know, all our business partners, right? Whether or not how we go about utilizing their parking lots.
Yeah, you know, what, one of the ideas, and I think we could think about this when we're looking at the updates to the zoning code. Is, you know, if you have a new commercial center that develops parking, you know, maybe the planning commission could condition that parking become available as public parking when maybe the office is in, right? So that's something that we can do. What I've seen other cities do is that they actually lease the spaces for, like, for example, let's say you had an office building, they have parking, like a kidney center, right? On the weekend, are they probably using the parking? They're probably not. In the evening, they're probably not using it, right? So if you had a nighttime use that was there and the city wanted to provide more parking without requiring, you know, in a nighttime facility to add additional parking, then I've seen other cities actually lease the parking spaces, which prevents them from having to actually build a whole parking structure, which is this number was like 10 years ago, so it was $250,000 per parking space. For parking structure, right? So when you think about all the parking spaces that you need in a structure and you multiply that by that number, it's pretty expensive.
Right, and so what, in these proposed parking structures, how many levels of parking structures were we considering?
It depends. I mean, we haven't done analysis of what we should do for our downtown, right? You know, I think some of the council members have raised the idea, so we would have to investigate how much it would cost and what would the need would be here. So is it like a 2-story, is it a 3-story structure? Right. The only city I know in the valley that has a structure is downtown Palm Springs, and then maybe the one behind El Paseo.
Yeah, one of the things that maybe it's probably worth considering, or maybe worthwhile to even look at, instead of going vertical, maybe we go subterranean, right? Because obviously then, you know, the footings, right, for the structure aren't as deep, right? And we just have to worry about weight on the top side level, right, as we go in subterranean. So that's maybe something to look at versus going vertical. And that obviously if we go to a 3-story level or 2-story level downtown, that's going to be the largest structure downtown, right? That's not like our tallest building is the apartment complex opposite of where we would probably want to build a structure. And so maybe it's worthwhile looking at subterranean facilities before we go vertical. Another thing, maybe, you know, looking at empty lots, right? And what do empty lots look like? Perhaps, you know, leasing those lots with some community members here, probably worth exploring as well then, right? Because maybe there's, even doesn't the city have an empty lot over here?
By Veterans Park.
Yeah, they use that for special events.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, they already use that? Okay,
The one in the corner, right?
Yeah,
yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
One thing that I think I saw in the recommendations is to make joint agreements like with the school and other places to lease those lots for those off hours for those special events and those gatherings. I think one of the recommendations is recommendation 6. I think you listed, correct?
Exactly.
And
And there's also an option there that they bring up, which is what Commissioner Hernandez was
Mhm.
saying, to lease vacant lots.
Yeah, perfect.
Mhm.
So
Because
can
we
we
also have, wait,
sorry, but can we also have that just so
one,
we
right?
can see it really fast?
Okay.
Okay, recommendations.
So
Yeah, so the recommendation cooperate parking, bicycle time, paid.
there's a second slide, so.
Thank you.
Since we're talking about this right now, would it be possible, I mean, as we continue on the discussion, if we would be able to get a cost analysis of what it would cost if we were to build our own structure? Depending on the needs, depending on how many additional parking spaces we want to add based on event needs versus leasing these areas, right? We have the adult school that's also available. I'm not sure if there's ever been conversations there about that one, the schools, right, everything that's going around. But I think it would be really helpful to compare the actual cost, because if it's cheaper, or it's gonna cost similarly the same in the long run to have our own parking structure, regardless of how we go about it, and might as well invest in that now. And remove the middleman, right? Remove that kind of like the headache of having to do the leasing, maybe they have other events or whatever it be.
I think it makes sense is to identify a parcel or parcels that they could potentially become parking structures, and then the number 250, that's way off. I mean, I don't think you're even gonna get close to that in terms of.
More, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's expensive, right?
$1
Like
billion.
double that.
yeah, no, it's not 1 billion, but it's about more than 250,000. So, I think identifying, because, you know, first of all, we already know that there's a lack of space in the downtown area. There's only certain lots available. So we have to start, you know, we're serious about building the structure. We have to start identifying potential lots that we could actually build a parking structure on. But I think ultimately, I think our solution right now is probably doing some type of mutual agreement with the school district. It's already paved. It's, you know, our main thing is, you know, obviously there's a liability to it, you know, the city incurs a liability, and also maintenance where after, you know, a certain event, we go there and clean it and just get it back to where give it back to the way we got it at. So I think that's gonna be part of the condition that they're gonna require also. So.
Also too, you know, I think before we start looking at, you know, these parking structures, right? Because once you go parking structure, it's gonna be there forever. You know, and it poses this like eyesore. I would like to see actually us slow down Grapefruit, like realistically, just slow it down. You put some speed bumps there, right? And then eliminate a lane and then designate more parking along Grapefruit there, right? Because I think that corridor can be something really special for not only downtown, but for all those businesses that face the street, right? So if you can slow it down somehow, even like I'm huge in favor about speed bumps, you know, really control traffic. Also too, I believe like the more time you spend or have to pay attention to how you're driving, you know, and really slow down traffic, really gives you a sense you get familiar with the area, right? And maybe you discover a Coachella bar, or maybe you discover the torteria that's there, or the candy store, right? And so we probably do slow it down, take a lane away, and, you know, make perpendicular parking versus parallel parking, right? And even when we got to meet with the architect from Santa Barbara here, when we did that study session with the city council, and we talked about traffic flow into downtown and really thinking about what the future of Coachella looks like, right? I wouldn't mind going one way into 6th Street now, you know, and create that cloverleaf effect, right, with traffic flow, and really utilizing with the space that we do have, where one way and go perpendicular parking, you know, especially along 6th Street, right? You're going to gain so much more traffic, or so much more parking spaces that way, right? And even if we have to create like a pilot program, or you know, during the event, right? If we do a dry run, or just see what the benefits are for something downtown, and hey, we're going to just do one way into 6th Street with, you know, just for this day only, to see what the benefits are, right? And see whether it is worthwhile to pursuing, you know, just going one way permanently.
I think it makes sense on the Grapefruit corridor that the traffic needs to be slowed down. I think another idea is like 6th Street all along the railroad there, maybe lease that property and then create a parking space in that area, maybe invest in some trolleys or do special events, you know, you can start bringing people into that parking space.
Yes.
Is
So-
it
Trolley,
Go train.
Golf carts.
But all those comments are definitely well taken. I think so kind of what you're doing here, you know, you have some role in being able to provide recommendations to council on how we manage parking in downtown, right? I think there's some good recommendations in the study, right, that you guys are talking about, and which ones you think work or don't, and then some other ideas that aren't even in the study. And so kind of what we'll do from this meeting is take those ideas. So because the council is going to receive the same report, right? And then we'll report to them what the planning commission talked about and recommended. So these ideas about, you know, Grapefruit Boulevard or one way on 6th Street, we'll include that in the report, right? In the presentation to them, so that they can think about some of those ideas. The idea of the parking structure, you know, we haven't done any studies on that, but it does make sense to look at the costs of the parking structure versus leasing parking in perpetuity from private parking owners. So all those are good recommendations that you know, we definitely also will share with the city council, because they're going to get this next week.
Next week.
Okay.
It's already going to go to the next week.
So can we, all right, obviously it's going to city council, but and obviously from down to then, there's probably isn't nowhere to meet, but maybe perhaps, you know, it would behoove both entities, both city council and commission to come together 2 by 2, perhaps, you know what I mean? And really, let's really figure out a solution moving forward, right? Because obviously we do have a parking issue, whether it be downtown or just as a greater whole community. And so perhaps the proper way or the best approach, you know, that we should take is get a 2 by 2 committee going, 2 city council members, 2 commission members, and let's just hash this out, right? And really focus in and buckle down on what our parking solution looks like for Coachella today and Coachella 20 years from now. right? Because it doesn't make sense that we, we adopt something today on the large scale and, and it just, puts a Band-Aid on this guy. And we come back 10 years later, 15 years later, right? But I'd rather see something, let's just iron it out. We got the bandwidth to do it and let's do it.
That's a good suggestion, if it's possible, but for something immediately, I think a resolution would be something that Commissioner Gonzalez proposed, and that would be something that the staff has also proposed, that is to lease and do joint agreements in the meantime, to alleviate that stress of parking as we continue these conversations. And just to be thoughtful and mindful as we move forward for the vision of Coachella.
Yeah, this can all be concurrently, right? But okay, we're gonna do this today, but let's work concurrently with implementing these ideas and plans, and let's really try to tackle this guy, we don't have to revisit this guy for 20 years,
And just think about what the plan commission did with the 2 parking spaces across the street. Was that probably a good way to manage parking, allow for turnover? It looks like it's worked, right? It looks like it's worked out. So, I definitely think that was a good call by the planning commission. And so what we want to make sure that we do as staff is bring you data, right? Because I get some of the complaints like, hey, why don't you build a parking structure? Well, what does the data say, right? So the data today says that we really don't need it, right? We should try other things first. And so where's the parking problem? The parking problem is probably this stretch right here today. But we should probably think about the long term, right? Maybe the long term is this idea of the parking structure, right? Which is going to cost more, but we should start kind of planning for it, see what the numbers are like. But are there some more cost effective things that we could do, like maybe leasing spaces or putting out signs directing people to where the available parking is, right? Because someone's coming for the first time, they probably don't know there's all this diagonal parking around the park, right? But it's there, right? And it's not that far away.
I'm just concerned about the parking structure. This is underutilized. It's going to be underutilized, just right off the back here. We obviously the data is the data, it's the proof in the pudding. And a structure, it would only be utilized for special events, which happen maybe quarterly, if that, right? Would it be utilized for 4 summer months per se? Right. So I don't see what the benefit of that structure would be. When
it could be, and then something to think about, and I think it was in this study that was done in the downtown, is that it did recommend looking at leasing space from the Union Pacific Railroad for additional parking, right? It's just land that's there, it's vacant. And I don't think the city's ever followed up on it, right? So maybe that's something that we should do. But because right now we don't take advantage of it. People actually do. Have you seen people park there for events? They just kind of do it, right?
park there for funerals.
Right? So they
Everything.
park possibly for
Don't park
funerals.
anywhere, they figure it out. They're like, as long as my car fits, I'm here.
Right, and technically not supposed to right now because the city doesn't lease it for that purpose. But that's another thing that I think we should probably look into because we just didn't follow through with our recommendation.
Yeah, so if there was a resolution saying that we move forward with leasing private property, right, to park at, with that, as events come, right, as we collect data, would we be able to eventually then go back to the idea of possibly a structured parking, see if it's beneficial or not, because of, as mentioned, if we haven't tried one of the less costly options, then we can't really just say, hey, let's spend all of this money. And your concerns are, it's valid, it's really valid. Is it really going to be used? Is it needed at this time? Or is it going to be needed maybe 10, 15 years down the road? Then we could continue, right? We could continue to revisit it, but what options do we currently have now that we haven't tried?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be opposed to mimicking what we did with 6th Street in front of 6th Street Coffee, putting another 15 minutes in another space to stagger it. So we create that quick flow, especially for if you're going to the Carniceria or you're going to Jalisco's or you're going to the little bakery here, it just makes sense. You're in and you're out for these kind of situations. So I wouldn't be opposed to that if the commission has something, if the staff has something to present and for us to vote on, that's something I'd like to propose to the table.
Especially in the frontage, right?
Yeah.
Of these
Locations.
Yeah, like Jalisco,
Mhm.
people
And-
just pull up there and it'll be an hour, 2 hours.
And we could start talking to the businesses again about it, because we did that when we did the spaces across the street. So with the firehouse, with the owner there, they weren't really concerned about like the short-term parking. They thought there was plenty. So that's why we didn't do that there. But we did get the complaint from Sixth Street Coffee or the request. And because they get a lot of like, you know, high turnover, right?
Yeah.
But there, I think they're looking for even Jalisco's, more people that are gonna stay there, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, right? So that's something that we could continue to do is have a dialogue with the business owners, right? And they could say, hey, this worked out really well. We want to see it now, right? So I think that's something that we could do next.
I also did want to add, I know that the what used to be called the True Boutique, the one that's over here, they used to offer like some Reiki treatments. Point being is that they would be like hour long, so definitely considering that, right? Thank you for reading it up and having them be part of the conversation, because it's also it's very dependent much on what service is being offered. If you were to put a 15-minute minimum at Jalisco's, would they even be able to deliver that, right? Like deliver that to the car, so it's definitely keeping them part of it, because we don't want their business to suffer, right?
Right, or maybe those 15-minute parkings in front of like restaurants just becomes designated pickup only, right? Like for those areas, because there's a lot of people that go in for pickup only and they have to park, 200 feet away because there's no pickup only designated area. Maybe that, we start moving in that direction, designating parking like that pickup only space for those people, right? So it's like 10 minutes in and out for those people in particular, right? That you consider everybody, they're just not the sit down.
Well, you can do staggered, you can do 30, there's different times, zones for different things. And I believe there's also like a loading and a pickup zone that could be considered, so there's so much on the table,
Or we
right?
just go towards paid parking
Last,
meters.
oh,
I think also too, maybe if we really want to be just bold and courageous to, you know what I mean? Does parking become a premium? I don't know.
I think,
what I mean? So that's something to consider, right? Because people really, parking's a premium. Obviously, it's a premium. And so if someone wants to park at a particular space for an hour, well, who's losing out on that parking space? So maybe that's that's where parking goes, right? Parking becomes premiums, and if it's a premium, should it be paid for? That's another consideration that we should take, right? So there's all these different ideas of how to solve parking solutions, and should you pay for your parking if you want to be there for an hour or two, right? Obviously, free parking on Sundays, the day of the event, that's cool too. But if you're looking for these areas and we want to mitigate parking on 6th Street, should they be metered? We create revenues. Something to consider as well.
So you would suggest parking the meters just on this street, not around the park, only?
Yeah, on 6th Street, right? That's where the premium parking spaces are at. That's where we're kind of looking for a parking solution. So I would say be metered. You know what I mean? Like if we really want to get down to, to the nuts and bolts of this thing, let's look at metered parking downtown. Because these are areas where it's premium parking spaces, right? And if you want a premium space, it's got to cost somebody something.
I think the conversations that start with the business owners.
I
Get a response from the business owners and then take it on to the next step. But I think that the business owners should have some input in terms of.
last year in our study in September 2022, I did speak to the owner from the Panaderia, which is Jorge.
Yeah.
And he was for a time restricted parking, but he kind of mentioned 30 minutes to an hour in front of his Panaderia. So that's something else that we could consider.
Yeah, because it's gonna have a direct impact. Most of the people going there 10, 15 minutes and get
Mhm.
caught in a.
Yeah, they know their business best. They
Yeah, so
they know their customer base. They know that whether if we were to put paid parking, will they lose customers, right? Overall, they could tell us best.
Yeah, because take their parking, for an hour and people are gonna,
Mhm.
you're gonna lose some business there too, so I think it has an immediate impact on. some of the
But no one's spending an hour at the panaderia,
No, pero that's why.
Well, yeah,
That's no point. You're gonna take,
We can't have them also exaggerated either, right?
I think like like these like the Panaderia, the most 10-15 minutes, right?
That's
You're
what I'm saying.
finding the guy, you're
Yeah.
finding bouncing.
That's what I'm saying.
And
15,
when
yeah.
you're waiting for hot bread to come out,
Yeah.
30 minutes. would be-
Maybe, okay.
But it's including the business owner in the dialogue to come to a consensus of what is the best time,
Right,
so.
the best thing to
yeah.
do, like, obviously you make the presentation, but just come back and say, hey, the council has, well, the commission has this desire to start a 2x2 and really work with, like we say, the business members downtown, right? And just weigh all our options with being commission and council together on the 2x2 committee and just interview your constituents and go from there and ask them what they would like to see and then really buckle down what parking solutions look like in downtown. But and then in the meantime, right, go with this recommendation.
Can we go back to recommendations just to recap, refresh our memory? Because I know we talked about several topics. Thank you, I appreciate it, sorry.
I have a question. How is it penalized when they go, like if we would have parking restrictions? Like if they go over 30 minutes, do we have security going around or how do they?
So I obviously we would have to equip, the city, well, the city would have to move in that direction, right? Which hire parking, parking officer, right? And that parking officer would monitor, right, who's ever in violation, right? And so one of the things about our city is we lack revenue streams. We really do, right? So we don't have any revenues, and I'm not saying this parking, meterized parking is a a solution to whatever it is that we know our deficit or whatever it is our revenues stream is. But when you start moving, we got to really consider what Coachella looks like, whether it be today, tomorrow, or the next 10-15 years, right? And we got to move the city in that direction, right? Especially if we anticipate the growth of downtown, right? So these we're trying to remedy for growth of the downtown right now and provide mitigation for that.
And there's solutions for that, Commissioner Hernandez.
Yeah,
I mean,
for
I'm
sure.
sure you know, like living in San Diego, I lived in LA, we both lived in different areas. You have parking, around residential communities. I think when the community gets to that growth, that threshold, I think that warrants that opportunity for that conversation, but there is avenues out there and solutions.
I don't think we're early yet. 'Cause
Exactly,
We're gonna have to install 50 meters of staying just the.
Parking
this
enforcement.
Gallery, parking enforcer, so I don't know what the numbers are, but I mean, that's what it seems to me, but
Agreed. Okay.
whatever the desire of the commission has, recommendations.
I'm just merely providing solutions, right? That's all I'm doing. It's just,
Yeah.
these are all these ideas. So if we really need to think outside the box, right? So like, okay, now so if we go towards metering, we're going to spend $500 million on a parking structure. I don't know. We're gonna weigh our options.
No, we do.
Okay.
Commissioner, all this feedback is really good and it's a feedback that we can share with the city council next week. And so this is only a receive and file. There isn't any actions for you to take. You can provide the feedback. We'll share that with the city council. And this is going to keep coming back to the planning commission, right? So you're going to see the numbers. We're going to provide the data to you. And so hopefully we can work on good management solutions for the downtown that's actually based on actual data. So see what it looks like in another 6 months.
Cool.
I have a suggestion for the data that comes to the commission or to the commission. Can you indicate the method that you use, whether it be an actual survey study, random sampling, with whatever methodology or method you use? That would be awesome. Thank you.
Okay, awesome.
And
thank
that's
you
in
so
your
much.
attachment. These
I did
graphs,
see that.
so these graphs are, it's a pretty simple method and a lot of cities do use it. So like La Quinta, I know use the same method. And so basically what happens involves like two people, right?
Exactly.
One's driving, the other person's
Driving, the other
counting. And then so we base it on the original parking study that was done in
2019.
2019, okay, 2019. They organized the blocks and they're like, okay, city staff every year monitor those blocks, right? Understand what the numbers are and do the counts. And so it's kind of tedious, right? Going out every 2 hours and then doing the survey. But it's helpful, right? Because it gives you a really good picture. So, that's pretty much what's involved.
Thank
Hopefully
you.
that's helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Going on to Other, item 3 on, non-hearing item. City of Coachella's annual progress report, APR, to the California Department of Housing and Community Development.
Okay, thank you, Plan Commission Chair, Plan Commission. So, I'll start off this presentation with, Anaí Fernandez, Management Analyst.
Hello, thank you, Chair and members of the Planning Commission. So I'll be presenting on the annual progress report to the California Department of Housing and Community Development. A little bit of background, California Government Code Section 65400 does require the city to prepare an annual status report on the 2035 Coachella General Plan implementation. This annual progress report is presented to City Council for review and acceptance, and then it is submitted to the state each year by April 1st. The APR assesses how the general plan is being implemented and provides information regarding the city's progress in meeting its regional housing needs. So going over the housing activity for 2022. In 2022, the city permitted 52 accessory dwelling units, which are allocated for low-income households. The city permitted 191 single-family detached units that serve above moderate income households, which were part of the housing projects in Sevilla, Mariposa Point, and Bellissima. And the city also issued 108 multifamily unit entitlements, no permits or certificates of occupancy yet for these units. 58 of them serve very low income households, and 50 units serve low income households. So Gabriel Perez, the director, will be going over the general plan implementation.
Yeah, so what Anaí covered is part of the data that we report to the state. And so I don't think we presented this report in the past to the Planning Commission. The council is the one that really needs to review the information. The reason why we wanted this to go before the Planning Commission is we probably think it's something that you want to review. But also you have a role with land use, right, in the general plan. And so the housing numbers, we have the report. We obviously have the housing element for the city. We do have a designated number of housing units we're supposed to provide for in the next 8 years. So the state does allocate how much housing needs to be produced in California. SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments, is the regional entity that assigns the housing numbers to all the different cities in Southern California. So our number is, I think it's 7,886 units that we have to produce in the next 8 years. So they want to measure how we're doing. That's a lot of housing units, right? So if you were able to propose, you're able to construct 7,886 units in the next 8 years, that's basically almost doubling the size of Coachella, right? So not sure if that's going to happen, but we do have to plan for that housing, right? So we have to create the land use that could accommodate that type of housing in the city. And we do have to assess the affordability levels of the housing that's produced in the city. So Anaí reported on the accessory dwelling unit numbers, that gets reported as low income housing to the state. The other housing numbers that were presented, a lot of the housing right now that's being produced is above moderate income housing, just the way the housing prices are going. We used to be able to report some of the market rate housing as moderate income, but just based on the price level, it no longer meets that threshold anymore. But part of the APR reporting is also how we are doing implementing other parts of the general plan. So you might recall, I went over a development review presentation with the Planning Commission in terms of things that you will be reviewing as commissioners. The general plan is our blueprint for the city, and there are 7 required elements that include land use, circulation, housing, conservation, open space, noise, and safety. So part of the efforts of developing the general plan involves like robust community engagement efforts. So these are some of the efforts that were ongoing in 2012. So it involved a lot of like working with young people, working with adults, elders in the community that kind of fed into what the policies are in the general plan. Right? So in the general plan, it'll look something like this, right? There's goals, And so this is an example of a goal in the land use element of the general plan. So it has goals around growth and development, and it has a list of policies associated with that goal. But along with that goal, there are some general plan implementation actions. This is an attachment in your staff report of actions that we're supposed to pursue that relate to all the different elements in the city. And then the way it's organized, it talks about the action that the city is should be pursuing, the priority level, right? So is it, high priority, is it low priority? The time frame. So is it short term or is it long term goal? Is it medium term goal? And then the responsibility. Is it the finance department that's supposed to carry it out? Is it the planning department? And the relevant goal in the general plan. So just high level what we reported in the staff report, because there's a lot of actions in there, right? If you saw the table, there's several, but I just wanted to highlight a few that I think are noteworthy. So in the land use element, there is an implementation action that talks about updating the zoning code and the zoning map to comply with the general plan. You will be seeing that on May 17th, and then it will go to the city council on June 14th. Right now, our zoning code and our zoning map is not consistent with the general plan, and so it should be. And so that'll be before you pretty soon this month. The next thing, and another action that's mentioned in that implementation action plan, is historic preservation study. We're going to have a historic preservation update soon. But the idea is hopefully we can do some more study of some of our historic resources in the city the next year. So we're intending to follow up with that. There's another action item about community engagement process protocols that the responsibility would be the planning department and the city manager. And so one of the things that we're looking to do is to implement a residential leadership academy, which we want to kind of present that idea to council in May for implementation this year, which would be an academy for residents to participate in, to learn more about how the city government works and how all our different functions, planning, finance, utilities. The next one is design guidelines update. So that's another implementation action for the general plan. Planning is also responsible for that. We are drafting objective design standards for multifamily and residential development, single family residential development. And that's going to be coming before the planning commission before the end of the fiscal year. So there are some good things happening. As far as the mobility element, it does call for a pedestrian and bicycle action plan. And there was an active transportation plan that has been adopted by the city. And so that's good news. We do have that, but now is more about implementation. Now, one of the elements we have in the general plan that is not required is the health and wellness element. And so we're looking to implement that. We're trying to do that through the planning division. So some of the actions that it calls for was developing more edible landscapes. So one of the things that the city has been doing recently is trying to introduce those edible landscapes in some of the parks. So if you go to Shady Lane Park, you've probably seen some of the fig trees, or I think there's apple trees in there. What else is there? I don't know if you've seen other fruit trees in there. But that's kind of the first step to be able to implement that in the city. And I think with future parks that are coming into the city, we are encouraging developers to do that more. And then the last one here for the health and wellness element calls for funding additional library facilities. And so the city did complete the 6th Street Library in 2018, but the city did also receive a state grant to fund construction of we call it the library annex area on 7th Street, which would be like the used to be the old library, right? And then the classrooms that are kind of along the side with these karate classes and those kind of activities there. We did get a grant to rehabilitate those buildings. So, but there are a lot of implementation actions that you'll see in that attachment that we haven't followed up with, right? So this is the first time we're kind of bringing this to the planning commission, the city council, to give you an idea of where we're kind of at, right? There's still a lot of work for us to do, but this is before you just as a receive and file document. And if you have any feedback, we're happy to accept that feedback. This is going to go to city council also next week.
And going on to item 4, historical preservation update, City of Coachella.
Can we talk about that or no?
The,
The last presentation?
yeah. are you-
Also, I had just one comment. I'm sorry, can I just say something?
Fine.
Okay, in regards to housing, obviously. I really don't know how much, what's within the commission's purview or within our right to weigh in, but. One of my biggest concerns in regards to housing is the number of housing, or the number of units that have been sold or people bought for investment opportunities, right? Right, whether or not that solves our housing issue, right? So there's a lot of these new developments that are out there. We are there's a whole block that's investorly owned. And so I'm trying to just figure out a mechanism, or trying to figure this out, is how do we really hone in on that and or curtail that, right? And really provide an opportunity for people to first-time buyers, et cetera, right? Because obviously, if we get a lot of investor driven development, so that price of affordability goes up, right? And so that's my biggest concern, right? Especially at some of the new developments that have been out there. You walk them, and there's, there's one block in particular that I have in mind that there's one resident, they're all sold, and the rest are, investor opportunities. I don't know if what's within our right as a commission to weigh in on that. Or maybe we, change some of the language in the zoning, where you put a limit to the number of investment homes that can be in new development. I don't know if that's possible. City attorney, but I don't know. Maybe it's warrants a larger discussion, or maybe we just have to really sit down and have a housing summit and really talk about, figuring out programs for first-time buyers. And if it's going to be, if we're going to allow investment opportunities, maybe there's a tax on, what I mean? And those people get taxed, and that money goes into first-time buyer programs. And or if we allow that type of, investment into our new development, maybe we have to enter into landscape agreements with them, right? At that point, if people are not maintaining them, they got to enter to an agreement with the city to maintain and operate their landscape. And we treat them as commercial, investors, right? Because obviously the loan is a lot different than a typical, first-time buyer or resident, residential, loan. Loan's a lot different. So we're really not solving our housing element issues when it comes down to the housing issues in Coachella. So that's my biggest concern there.
I think we had that conversation on the commission already, and that was a concern I had also. That some of these new developments are being gobbled up by, investors and people, hedge funds, and there needs to be, I don't know what our legal realm is in terms of saying, 60% or 70% of these 80% of development should go to first-time home buyers, and outside interest should only have a certain percentage. I think what we're doing is that we're doing a disservice to the community. We need to have people that want to invest in Coachella in the long term. These people are, they're just actually buying it. Obviously, they're investors too, but they don't live on the property. So when you have people that actually are part of the community, I think you're creating a more balanced community.
Yeah, I don't mind. I really don't mind the investor. I just think that there should be a tax for what they're planning on doing, right? It's really they're going after short-term leases or rents, whatever,
Yeah, well,
and maybe perhaps we treat them a little differently, right? Obviously, the short-term lease agreements tax is minimum in Coachella, but if they're wanting to do that, then we need to really treat them as they should be, as a commercial entity, and really like, hey, okay, then your landscape you have to enter into a landscape agreement, and you have to provide X, Y, and Z, right, for what you want to do and how you're looking at investing in that tax. Maybe perhaps goes into a first-time buyer program for the city, for people that don't have adequate finances for that, right? So there's probably different ways to going about it. I'm not saying that not to have those investors, but we're gonna have investors. Like, we need housing solutions for people, for the children of Coachella.
Do we have a number in terms of what the percentages are?
We could come back with that number because the information is available. But those comments are good comments for this, 'cause it's about our housing activity, and they do relate to what's available in terms of being able to buy homes in Coachella. So we can share that in our presentation to city council. I know the discussion has come up at different times and from council members. So having that feedback from the planning commission is good timing right now. In this, there's gonna be another opportunity too, because we will be having our housing element come to the planning commission within the next 2 months too. Those are about our housing policies, so that's gonna come forward as well. But we'll share these comments about some concern about the short-term rentals, just because there is ways to deal with it, right? Without having to do an outright ban, but we could definitely look into all the different possibilities.
Yeah, I'm not looking for an outright ban. That's not what I want. I just
Yeah.
I want solutions, right? I love them. You know what I mean? And I appreciate everybody that has them. But if you're gonna have them, then you're operating, as such as an entity business, then let's really focus in on the permitting. Let's really focus in on, on landscape and, X, Y, and Z, right? What will require commercial entities to do, right? And that's to own and operate and maintain their properties.
I think we get the numbers and see what they reflect and then take it from that point, but I think that's important, for people that want to become residents of the city of Coachella and want to invest here and raise their kids here and school. And so I think that's very important. So if we get a number, I mean, that would really help.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. On the 9 hearing item 4, should we go back to historical preservation or?
Yes.
Okay, so historical preservation update, City of Coachella.
Okay. So I'm gonna try to go through this pretty quickly because we've had a long evening already. But this is just an update on historical preservation in the city, and the planning commission has a role with this in the municipal code. So I provided some of this presentation in the architecture study session that we had on Saturday a few weeks ago. But we've been collecting a lot of information about the history of Coachella. This is a Sanborn map from 1928 of the downtown area. This is kind of like the first area that really started developing, right? Around the railroad. So you can see the railroad going in the diagonal direction. And all those different numbers represent just different areas in the downtown. You can see that it was platted out at that time in a traditional kind of rectangular patterns that you see today. But that all came from, the early 1900s. And it's kind of a treasure to be able to find some of those maps, and it kind of shows you what the uses were, in the downtown at that time. So this is an image that shows what used to be in Coachella on 6th Street, but at that time it was considered First Street, like when it first started, right? So on 6th, so really 6th Street used to be, that block, which probably there are some buildings that haven't been occupied yet in a long time, but that was really the hub of Coachella back then in 1928. So you could see on the 2-story building that right now that's not occupied and will be under development in the near future. That's was the first Masonic Lodge in the city, and it was a 2-story building. It was also a pool hall. Next to it was actually a movie theater. It used to be called the Paramount Theater, and I think it's had about 400 people. And there are some people that have memories of that theater that used to be there, but it's since been demolished. Markets, some bars that used to exist on 6th Street. We used to have a train depot in the city, so along the railroad, you could see that yellow building that used to be a passenger and a freight depot in the city, and that was constructed in 1903. There used to be a hotel in Coachella on 7th Street. So if you look at that large blue blob at the bottom or rectangle at the bottom, it used to be called the Hotel Des Palms at that time. And they used to have like a cafeteria in the lobby. So here's a closer look. You probably can read the wording. So we compiled some of this, and this shows you what the buildings used to look like in the different areas. So you could see the Masonic Lodge, which, you know, now that time used to have a covered canopy area around the whole building along the frontage. You could see one of them was the pool hall at the bottom right. Another place was called Dave's Place. That's the middle bottom photo. And then Lopez Hardware still looks very similar to what it used to look like when it was first was a bank. And then the Jalisco top left, that canopy structure isn't there anymore. It's a new structure that's there. So it looked like at some time they demolished that building. And then you had Yan's drugstore at that time. So you had all these historic buildings. Some of them still exist. That's the Paramount Theater, my old aerial photo. And so it was quite a big building, and they used to show silent movies in that movie theater. There's an image of what it looked like from the street, but we couldn't find any other pictures. But I did talk to you know, a resident that was remembers going there as a child, right? So few people have some of those memories of that building at that time. Before it was the Paramount Theater, it used to be an open air theater called the Coachella Air Dome. And so there's some articles about the Coachella Air Dome before it was actually a constructed building. We used to have a trading post. So kind of what's there now is does everyone remember the keg? That keg building? Yeah. And then there was like I think a dentist or next to it. So that's the location of, this is what used to be there before. Used to be a trading post when
And a swimming pool. in the back?
that's not Griffith Boulevard, that's Cesar Chavez Street. But yes, there was a swimming pool in the back.
Yeah.
And you might, maybe some of you might know the story behind it, but there was a pool back there that's no longer there anymore, right? And so all that got demolished. There was an old Adobe building in the frontage, and there was actually a gas station. So if you look at the old black and white photo, and then the other black and white photo to the left, you could see that gas station was totally enclosed at some point, you know, decades ago. Oh, I can't move the thing. Did you? Okay. The other historic building to note, identify as the Covalda Date Packing Building. We talked about this at a previous Planning Commission meeting about a year ago, but this used to be at the end of 6th Street and Cesar Chavez Street. So the building's no longer there anymore, but it used to be a place where you can get date shakes and dates. And it used to be advertised in the LA Times one point. These are the date packing workers at that time. So this is a photograph maybe from the 1940s. And then this is an image of the train station that we had in the city in 1903. And so different photos of that site. And what the floor plan would have looked like at the time with the waiting room. And,
Where's the baseball team?
Yeah, go back. Was it CB High or?
I think it was like
Oh,
called
the-
Coachella, that's Coachella, right?
The Coachella Valley League.
Yeah, so there was the Coachella Valley League, and then there was another baseball team that I forgot. I think they were called the Indians in the valley, right? And I guess it was a big deal because a lot of the newspaper articles at the time, it talks about like those two teams playing each other.
My grandpa's right there.
I have,
I'm just
Oh,
kidding.
okay.
I have one of the old uniforms, says Coachella telephone, so.
Oh, you do?
It's wool with the embroidered, got the shirt and the pants, and friend of mine gave it to me.
So a lot of people don't know that depot exists. And that sign used to say a certain amount of, you know, I can't read it from here, but a certain amount of miles to San Francisco, and the other certain amount of miles to New Orleans, right? So it was a place where you can connect to the railroad and go to a lot of different destinations throughout the country.
Says 1913, is that correct on the banner?
Is it?
Am I reading it correctly?
Well, 1903 is when it was built, and it was
No,
built
on the-
for $4,000.
On that little flag where the guys that have the uniform, the baseball team,
Oh,
1913,
does it? Yeah, that picture's probably for that. So the reason I'm bringing this discussion up is that there's opportunities to recognize some of our historic resources in the city. Other cities have created historic districts, so if you've been to Old Town Orange or other cities, when you get those designations, you can actually put these signs on the freeway and let people know that there's something special in your city. And so some of you have probably seen that on the freeway. You know, wayfinding signs that just point out that there's kind of a special place in your city. Walking tours, so this is an example from the city of Orange. The last city I worked in was developing this historic district in San Clemente, and so it becomes also a way to encourage like tourism and economic development in your city. So the reason I bring this up is that the Plan Commission does have a responsibility for historic preservation. So you are like an advisory board to the city council when it comes to historic preservation. So some of your duties that you have is that you can investigate, you know, the possibility for historic sites and structures and historic districts in the city as they relate to the archaeological history, architecture, the political history, economic and social history. Coachella, you can recommend surveys and studies. You can recommend that, you know, if you're studying a project and you think it's something needs to be surveyed further, you can definitely make the recommendations. And request assistance from individuals that have the expertise, right? Getting a historic preservation consultant to do that work for the city. But other duties are also initiating proceedings to actually designate the historic site or district in the city. And if you think there are buildings that should be nominated to the historic register, national register, that has to be done at a public hearing before the city council. Ultimately, they make that decision. You could issue orders to prevent a demolition of a building for up to 120 days. And then it could be extended, I believe it's 30 days after that, in order to really have a study done on the building before there's a possibility that it be demolished. And then there's different classes of historic sites and structures in the city. So class 1 would be the highest, where, you know, really the goal is preservation, and you would plaque the building. And then you have a class 2, which would be kind of like second tier level of historic structure. And then class 3, which wouldn't be necessarily a plaqued building, but you could request that the building be evaluated and not be demolished until it's studied. And then you could also establish historic district for the city.
Gabriel, I have a question, may I?
Huh?
For historic preservation at this time, is there, I know that this is just like a report, but just for me to edify myself a little bit further, is there anything right now that the staff recommends that we should seek out for historic preservation? And if there is, what that is? And also if there's any monetary cost or any benefit, I mean, I know there's benefits to it, but if we could talk about that, if there is something for us to, you know, continue.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what I'll talk about here
thank you.
is just some
Excited.
recommendations. So, you know, I think there's a lot of opportunity just based on some of the information I showed you,
Yeah.
right? We don't have any historic structure designated really in the city, and maybe there's an opportunity to be able to do that. Sometimes there's benefits for the property owner too. They can get a lot of tax savings. There could be agreement with the owner to be able to experience that tax savings over a period of like 20 years. And it could be really beneficial to them. So on the short term, I think there's opportunity to update our historic survey. We last did one in 2006. And so since that's been almost 20 years since then. So there are some buildings that haven't been surveyed in the city. It does cost money to do that. So we would have to request that from the city council to be able to do that. But the other, we contacted the Office of Historic Preservation for the state, And they really recommended that we develop a historical context statement. And that really establishes like, why is Coachella historic, right? It could be different reasons, right? There's an agricultural history. There's the history of the farm worker movement and Cesar Chavez in the city. 6th Street has a lot of history, right? And being, you know, just kind of one of the first downtowns in the whole Coachella Valley, first Masonic Lodge, first, there's a lot of firsts really in that area. UFW office used to be on 6th Street. There's just a lot of history that, you know, I'm sure some of you might have had experience with.
The Catholic Church, what did that fall under? On First Street there?
As what? As a historic building? Yeah, so I don't know if I ever mentioned, so in the Sanborn maps, it's actually referred to as the Mexican church back then. Yeah, very interesting.
So if there were to be like, if there were to be approval of a study to be conducted, would we, for say, if we were to recommend that we install plaques with the photo of what the building used to look like, right? Something to kind of create more of that foot traffic. I know that when in the art commission, something we had discussed was possibly creating like a path to all of the murals, right? Just so people knew how to walk. But bringing this now here, if we really do want to grow and preserve the history of downtown Coachella, for us to be able to do that, because it's simply just looking at this and seeing the buildings and what they used to be, right? It's exciting and it's nice to hear about it, what the city used to look like before and what it's become now. And it also allows us to reflect back on how far we've come.
Mhm. Yeah, I think just kind of to add to that, if you've ever seen like people that haven't been to Coachella before, they kind of look around and they're like, hey, what are these like interesting like buildings that are here? And a lot of people don't know the story to them, right? So
Just to piggyback what she was saying, when I was on the planning commission back in 2014, 2013, we were working with the Coachella Chamber of Commerce at the time to create pamphlets to feature the artist who was painting on the mural and the actual mural itself. And I don't know what became of that. But these things, like, you know, she's talking about, this is, you know, when did you serve on the art commission?
Last year.
Last year, right? So that's, we're looking at close to 9 years later per se, right? When these discussions are still happening. But we need to just follow through on a lot of these ideas that we already have, you know, we've been there, and we just put a period at the end, you know, instead of tabling the issues and go for it, man. I fully trust you, boss. You know what I mean?
yeah, well,
See us through.
so in that, yeah, and that's definitely the reason for this report to the planning commission. So I think there are some things we could do on the short term, which is mentioned above. And the long term, you know, it really depends on what we do in the short term, right? Like, does it make sense to establish a historic district? Well, we really need to see what the historic resource inventory shows us and what the historical context statement shows. You know, are there sites we want to designate as historic? Maybe, or maybe not, right? Maybe the owner doesn't want to do it.
One more comment just came to my mind here. I apologize. But obviously this building is not utilized anymore, right?
Well,
Maybe-
for I mean, it's leased to nonprofits, the chamber.
Like the outskirts, right?
Right.
Yeah, but this building in particular, when maybe this becomes a visitor center, right? On its off hours, and maybe that lobby becomes, you know, where all of our pamphlets, our material lives, right? We just open the doors and we have somebody that is here, or, you know, city staff, you know, is, yeah, or volunteer, right? Senior center. But maybe this is where it all lives, right? You have it's centralized in downtown, and we open up our doors and we have a map of, you know, and this becomes, hey, the art walk guide map is here, right? And also our pamphlets and our historical center. You know, we already have pictures, right, of old Coachella that line the walls here, right? So maybe we can really utilize this space and open its doors 24/7 and let people walk in here, right?
So kind of hearing like a museum finally for the city of Coachella. Huh?
Yeah,
I think the narrative in terms of the art walk, you know, maybe some of you know that we've been working with the art community for a lot of years in the city. We've been pushing the narrative of actually First Street, down Vine Street, all the way to transitions in the shady lane all the way to 52, where the Bears at is actually creating an art walk in that whole area. And there's a lot of walls available, and we've been pushing that whole idea of creating more art, and statues and sculptures, so. You know, we do have an area where people say, oh, I'm gonna go visit Coachella. Well, guess what? We have an art walk and we have this whole section of the city that's infested with, you know,
Yeah.
beautiful art, you know, and so, yeah, we're still pushing that narrative and I'm gonna continue to do it and you know, it's been a little gradual, but, you know, I don't know, we're just gonna keep, I'm gonna keep moving on that, so.
Sure.
It's definitely, it's definitely come up, but I know the, what do you call it, the public art, you know, isn't no longer a role of this body anymore, right? Art in Public Places Commission. But you know, if that develops, right, you have other opportunities with the historic district. So I showed you the other example of the other cities where you can take a walking tour, right? But so you can do that for the historic buildings, and then you could do it with the art and have.
Yeah, so it'd be a combination of both. I think that's sort of the building. I think eventually, you know, the Veterans Park being identified as one of the epic center of the United Farm Workers and Cesar Chavez, you know, so I was fortunate enough at a young age to be involved and I seen it, you know, unravel right in front of me. So that was the epic center of the whole folk movement. I'm talking about the early 70s.
Yeah.
So it's historical and, you know, he was here, it all happened here. This was the epic center of
I
the
don't,
United
I
Farm
don't, I
Workers.
don't know what the, I haven't seen the layout for that proposed parcel that would turn into a park there. You know, down the ways here on Shady Lane here, but maybe there we could also place maps there, right? And that, you know, because that's kind of in between from what we have, the murals at Shady Lane, right? All that's there. We have a mural, we can have a map there and saying, pinpointing other areas of interest. And from there, we, you know, they can shoot up north and come down and look at all this stuff happening here downtown, but you know, we gotta
There's an,
have a place of reference. And
yeah, there's an ongoing conversation with some of the leadership at IID that I've been involved in. And one of the ideas is too that there's a wall just as long as the Shady Lane mural. That we propose to do a world theme mural, we're bringing in different graffiti artists from around the world to do something that pertains to their country. So we could probably feature 30+ countries, you know, if we. But that wall needs to be replaced like the Shady Lane mural. That wall was originally started in the, I would say around the mid-70s, never got done. And then after they replaced the wall, actually,
we'll also negotiate a sidewalk there too.
I've been, no,
Let's stick to the historic.
I mean, that would be ideal, I mean, to do all that.
Yes.
There's a lot of other space there too, because, you know, one of the ideas is for them to cover all that junk they have there.
Yeah, for sure.
And hopefully we can utilize that space also to do more murals. They have, you know, there's a bunch of property that they actually are owners of that would love to, you know, collaborate with them and hopefully we get, you know, there's a sculpture garden that there's also no gallery too. It's part of the idea. So,
The quickest way to launch this is just to utilize what we currently have, right? Like down the city hall, partner with the senior center, and maybe the senior centers are the volunteers here, right? And go from there, you know, and really start, you know, getting them active in the community as well, right? So they can have a rotation. Who's going to man the post here at the visitor center, what we call.
Or even then, like if that could be definitely like the go-to center, right? Definitely get them more involved. I completely agree with it, but also seeing what other cities are doing. So bring back the newspaper stand, right? Where we're able to leave the pamphlets and people are able to grab them, take it for free and take yourself on a self-guided tour. When we talk about bringing economic foot traffic, right? Getting people to explore the city more. Like when I think things to do in X city, right? That's what the first thing I do whenever I'm visiting a new place. We want, this would be great if this were to pop up, right? Get people to the downtown area, get more folks to come down through here. If they're looking for free things to do, this is something free they could do. And in the long run, maybe they're going to come back again, right?
Yeah.
They're going to want to visit the area again. So it doesn't necessarily have to be so like a huge expense, but we could simply put, hey, here is where Cesar Chavez stood and gave this speech,
Yeah.
right? In the park. Here is where this used to be a pharmaceutical, whatever it is, you put a picture in and it's that, but definitely ask this, if there's a study that's conducted for the historic preservation and all, is to definitely keep this in mind on what do we want to do with that information, right? And I think it seems like majority of everyone is on board that we do want to create sort of like in a short sense, like a monument, right? Definitely making sure that everyone knows what happened here and they get a better idea of what Coachella is.
Yeah.
And then in turn, tie in, of course, definitely work with the other commissions and see how we can continue to build on that.
And also too, a good way to finance this is that, you know, we get some of our restaurants involved. Perhaps on there, you know, as we create this literature, it's like, oh, come have the best media at Garibaldi, or come have a
They could
taco
sponsor, yeah.
at Jalisco, or you know what I mean? Come have a date shake here, you know what I mean? And coffee, you know, a coupon on this thing, you know, like, oh, I came across this artwork and I have your coupon here,
Yeah.
Mhm.
you know, so stuff like that. Just
And again, it's
really look
free,
at- that's
completely free. It brings more foot traffic.
Yeah.
We get everyone involved.
or just come pick up the pamphlet, just get the coupon, you know?
What's the space being utilized right now for the old library? Are they using that space?
The old library, yeah, you know, I don't have the details of what's gonna happen with the grant, but I know it's supposed to be refurbished.
I think that would be an ideal spot to start as a museum. And I'm sure there's items out there, a lot of people in the community own that would love to share, you know, with the public, you know. I know I have some. But
You have them all.
yeah, so
You can start with that uniform.
oh, yeah, there you
You
go.
can donate it to the city,
Yeah.
put it on display.
Peaceful.
I have a-
So
But
Gabriel,
I can give you an update next time. I don't know all the details of what's proposed inside the building, but I can do that next time.
I
and
have
so
a brass plaque that has an elevation of City Hall,
Oh, really?
1954, you know, so,
Nice.
and so I got a bunch of stuff.
So Gabriel, for when I noted that there's a staff recommendation, so you're saying short-term, long-term, so for the short-term, is that the plan for staff to develop a historical context statement? Is that what it is? Okay, so that's in progress.
It's not in progress yet, so, you know, this is kind of presented to you like, hey, this is what staff would like to do. If you'd like the idea, then we'll do that. It'll come back to you again, right? So we have to go to council and say, you know, if you want to provide funding to be able to do this for the next year. So-
Okay.
So we'll report all the ideas that the planning
Thank
commission
you.
provided today.
Well, we recommend that you continue doing what you're doing.
Okay.
I
we'll
want
do it.
I want a motion, is that what we need?
This is just a receive and file.
Just
so
a receive and
We'll make note of all your comments for council.
Okay, going on to public hearing calendar and quasi judicial.
And there are no items on the public hearing calendar.
Okay, informational. Development service tentative agenda.
So again, this is the tentative agenda we provide to you, just to give you an idea of what's coming up for the planning commission. May 17th is gonna be a very busy meeting, so this meeting lasts to 7:40. It might be a longer meeting the next time. So we have several items like the airport business park. We have the zoning consistency update, that's a pretty big item. And a few more other items. I don't have it in front of me, but we are gonna be pretty busy in that meeting, so just kind of, we won't have any study sessions at 5 o'clock, but we would just kind of expect it, it's gonna take a while.
So can we move that meeting up time?
I don't think we can, because I think in
Okay.
the code, it's a designated time.
Oh, okay.
Day.
Cool.
So it's
Otherwise, I would want to do that, yeah.
6 o'clock. Okay. Ready. Adjournment. Motion to adjourn or adjournment 7.
We need a motion.
I motioned.
Our
I'll
second? Or, you want a second? You can go ahead, yeah, you can have it.
I'll second.
Okay,
Thank you, Commissioner Morgan. Appreciate it.
okay. Commissioner Ramirez,
Yes.
Commissioner Murillo,
Yes.
alternate Commissioner Fonseca.
Yeah.
Vice Chair Hernandez.
Nope,
No.
no, I want to continue, I want to be here all night.
We are comfortable.
Commissioner Arvizo
Yes.
and Chair Gonzalez.
Yes. Adjournment 7:42.